Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Goosebumps Podcast Can Be Murder. Tonight I have the entire crew with me. So in order, Brandon Sime. I also have an Otaku Life for me. I have Evan.
Oh, what up?
I've got the Grinch. And I have Waffle Fan 42 with me. Waffle Fan 42 unfortunately can't speak to us, so he's going to be chiming in through chats. Such as that. Alright, so today we are going to be reviewing the 7th book in the Goosebumps series. Anybody want to tell me what that book is?
Night of the Dummy.
Okay, so who wants to go over the plot summary?
Okay, so Chris and Lindy are twin sisters, and Lindy finds
Slappy in the trash.
She finds him in the trash at a construction zone.
because she's jealous.
Yeah, because it tells you that in the comic book that she finds Slappy in the trash. And she gets and her sister gets jealous. She gets wood.
Says some magical words, and some weird things starting to happen, and I suspect the dummy is behind all this weird stuff.
Alright, so let's start here. The dummy she finds' name is Mr. Wood, or that's what she names him. The spell she states is the same spell that Slappy uses. Karu, Kari,
Yes.
Madonna, Olana, Mararu. In short, it's Latin for you and I are now one. So, in this book, though, we're still in the early phase of Goosebumps, where things are kind of hardcore, you know what I'm saying? Like, Mr. Wood chokes out their dog.
Oh, definitely hardcore.
Vomits on a first row of people.
Yeah.
Dude, he pukes in an ocean of puke.
He strangles a dog.
Yeah. And then he chokes out, was it Chris or Lindy? He chokes one of the twins out, too.
About Chris.
And they're like, holy shit. And Mr. Wood's just sitting there choking her and beating her head on the back of the stairs. Like, he ain't nothing to fuck with. So, in short, yeah, it's like the twins have this complex where, oh, I can do this. Well, I can be better at it. And so, because Chris has Mr. Wood, Lindy ends up getting her own puppet, Slappy. Which, Slappy takes a back seat to this, and I think that was probably the coolest fact of this book, is Slappy's on the cover, but in the back of the book, it's all about Mr. Wood. You know, Slappy really just takes a back seat to all of this.
I just love the Slappy's introduction at the end of the book.
Alright, so let's go in order here. Let's start with Evan. Evan, why don't you tell us a bit about how you thought about this book? What'd you like about it?
Like we just mentioned, how much darker it is as a book, because it's so early on. I mean, at least I always wondered why it never got adapted, and then I read it. I remember this was a book as a kid, too, where before I had read it, someone had already spoiled the twist for me that Slappy wasn't in the book. That's what got me to read the book, though, was because I was really interested in how... Because, yeah, obviously I had seen Night of the Living Dummy on the show, parts 2 and 3. So, yeah, that's kind of what hooked me, was I was like, well, how's it Night of the Living Dummy, but Slappy just shows up at the end? Yeah, for that reason, it's, definitely one of my favorites, for sure.
Okay. Grinch, why don't you tell us your thoughts on this book? What'd you like about it?
I have to say, for being a Mr. Wood-focused book, even though it's called Night of the Living Dummy, with Mr. Wood as the bad guy and Slappy being, like, backseat until, like, toward the end, he's very hardcore because later on in the book, spoiler, tries to threaten the sister's dog because they lock him in the suitcase and he's like, you can't get rid of me. I have to say, Slappy's line at the end of the book, where he says, hey, slaves, is the other guy gone? I thought he never leaves.
I can do it way better. I can do the voice.
Alright, Josh, why don't you tell us what you liked about the book and then do the voice?
Okay. I love the story. I mean, it was the third story I ever read as growing up. You know, Goosebumps, Slappy's always been my favorite villain. So when I originally found out, hey, Slappy's not in this book, I'm like, oh, what was the villain then? I love the original ending where Slappy says, hey, slave, is the other guy gone? I thought he'd never leave.
Okay, Brandon, why don't you tell us something you liked about this book, and what do you think about it?
So, I want to talk about one part that I'm surprised no one talked about, which is the artwork, because this is the only book where, as a kid, I was so genuinely afraid of the cover, I used to have to put sticky notes on the cover to cover Slappy's face.
Gotcha. I mean, yeah, the artwork is great. It's iconic. I mean, if you see that picture, you know right then and there that you're in for a scary time. Okay.
Yep.
Waffle, why don't you send us a quick type-up of what you thought, and I'll read it for you. Book was spooky. I thought the green throw-up was the monster blood. You know what? You make a good point, Waffle. It could have been monster blood for all we know.
What?
That would have been a cool little twist.
Yeah.
That's an interesting twist.
Personally, for me, I think one thing I liked about it is how they killed Mr. Wood. For me, I really enjoy the fact that they took him to the construction site where they got him from, and they threw him in front of a steamroller. And then the dude gets off, and he's like, holy shit, did I just kill a kid? It's like, whoa! God, you just don't get stuff like that anymore.
Actually, I think it's Slappy they find at a construction site.
No.
Mr. Wood is from a magic shop or something like that.
Yeah, Mr. Wood's finding a magic shop. Slappy's finding a construction site.
Maybe you're right. I don't remember. I'm not going to lie to you. I read this book like 2 weeks ago.
Just finished it today.
So, let's talk about things we didn't like. Starting with Evan. What's something you didn't like about this book? Oh, also, Waffle states it was a dumpster near the construction zone. Thank you, Waffle.
It's kind of hard because what I would say I don't like about it is also a positive, though, to me, which would be that Slappy isn't really in it, until the end. But I think Mr. Wood as a character, if I had to complain about one thing, it would be that Mr. Wood isn't as iconic as Slappy, I guess. Like, he doesn't, to my knowledge at least, I don't think he shows up again, right?
He does. Slappy's nightmare.
It's funny.
Right. Okay, yeah.
It's funny you say that. I got a guy who comments on my channel religiously about how Mr. Wood should be the mascot and that Down with Slappy. Constantly comments that.
Well, yeah, I don't feel that powerfully about it, but
neither do I.
Yeah, he just feels more underutilized than Slappy does.
I agree. All right, so let's move on. Grinch, what's one thing you didn't like about the book?
I have to say it's definitely the relationship between the sisters at the beginning, because the sister who has Slappy is more like a brat towards the middle of the book, when he's like, oh, I got Slappy, you don't. And especially when she made Slappy, or Slappy hits Chris, or one of the two, it's like, I didn't do it.
Okay. Josh, what's one thing you didn't like about the book?
I didn't like the main rival that they were trying to push, which is not only sibling rivalry, but jealousy of your sibling.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that it can be a toxic trait, and I think kids got enough problems. I don't really need to focus on that,
Yeah.
All right. Brandon, what's one thing you didn't like about the book?
I guess same thing with the whole toxic relationship between the sisters, and also how annoying they are in the beginning with the one-upping each other. Like, oh, I ate 3 pieces of gum, I ate 4. It's like,
yeah, bro, chill.
So I'm gonna go to Waffle. No, Slappy in the first book feels disappointing. Okay, that's a good point, Waffle. I do agree. We don't get very much of Slappy in this book, and it is kind of disappointing. But this actually segues into my point. So for me, I don't like the ending. I like the twist, but it's ambiguous for me. When Mr. Wood gets popped by the steamroller, they talk about a green mist leaving him. Was that his spirit, or was that the spirit migrating from Mr. Wood to Slappy? I know in the comic they explain it, but in this book, before the comic existed, it's very ambiguous.
Right, that's a good point.
Hey, Bump.
Go ahead.
If I remember, in both book 2 and the episode, and especially in number 3, they also show that spirit thing, and I'm like, in number 2, Slappy's spirit, when he dies, he transforms into the other dummy who head keep falling off. That's
Dennis.
the first episode, if it ever happened.
Yeah, it's very ambiguous. So let's go around in the group here, starting with Evan. Do you think that Mr. Wood died, or do you think that he became Slappy?
Well, I wouldn't say he died, but I don't think he became Slappy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Josh?
I'm going on the fact that when Mr. Wood died, the evil spirit inside of Mr. Wood attached itself to the evil spirit inside of Slappy, making him 10 times more evil.
Okay.
It was described in the comic book.
I could get behind that, too.
Okay. Brandon?
Yeah, I'm going to get behind that with Josh, too.
All right. Grinch?
We learned later that Slappy was made by an evil magician, but I feel like Mr. Wood's soul was only half of Slappy's evil ability. I feel like he already had some, and I'm just gonna watch the show and reveal myself till by the end after the other guy dies.
So kind of like 9, the soul was split into fragments.
Yeah, got that.
All right, Waffle, what do you think? Do you think that Mr. Wood died and became Slappy, or what are your thoughts on that? Let's see what Waffle says. Lots of different haunted puppets, such as Slappy, Birthday, and Evil Twin. That is true, not to forget Slappy's son as well. Let's talk about why there's not an episode, and why and how the puppet we know as Slappy was originally supposed to be Mr. Wood. Evan, do you want us to kind of start us off there?
Yeah, well, I think I touched on this earlier about how it was before I had read the book, I had always wondered, why was this never adapted as an episode, but parts 2 and 3 were. And you actually read the book, and then you realize how violent it is, and just because R.L. Stine was in that growing pain stage of his career with Goosebumps, at least. So,
yeah, it wasn't technically a series yet. It was just a series of books.
Yeah, right. He was still forming it and what it would be, so...
Animal abuse all day.
I think they could have personally made it. They did make Welcome to Dead House less scary. They could have made Night of the Living Dummy less scary by taking some of the stuff out of it. Maybe not having him strangle a dog or strangle a kid.
Or the puke scene.
But that's iconic.
It wasn't that bad.
No, that, I'm just saying, but still.
Grinch, what do you think? Why do you think this didn't become an episode?
Well, here's the thing. Unlike 2 and 3, where they're had a bigger budget, so the puke scene, they didn't have enough time to do it. All those scenes, especially because they have to find the right places that look exactly like how Aldine put it. They didn't know how to make the puke, fake puke.
Yeah, they did. The 90s was full of slime. Let's just say that there was no construction happening in good old Canada. Brandon, why do you think this was an episode? Then I'll reveal to everybody what the real reason is.
This is just me. I think it's just because, Slappy wasn't, Mr. Wood, again, wasn't as popular as Slappy. Because Slappy, at that point, when the TV show started, recognizable dummy because, he had a sequel at that point and was on his way to... Or, no, wait, would he have had... He might have had the third book out by that time.
He had the third book out.
Yeah, he did.
Okay,
he did.
So he's 3 books in. He's 2 books in. Well, 3 technically in a way, but he was more recognizable. He was being featured in merchandise. Why would we focus on Mr. Wood, who, in the broad eye of the mainstream, barely anyone knows?
Okay, so I like that point. Definitely a good point. Waffle, what do you think before I, speak my part? Slappy didn't want to share an episode. Aha! You're playing into the vanity, and I love that. Good call, Waffle.
I can see that.
All right, so here's the real reason, guys. Part of you are right when it comes down to budget, but it's really down to this. 1, Night of the Living Dummy 1 and 2 are practically the same book. 2, it's a lot cheaper to hire one child actor than a pair of twins. 3, like Grinch said, the sets were a bit different. I think they were in the middle of creating this episode when they go, you know what? No. And that's why Slappy from the TV series looks like Mr. Wood, because Mr. Wood had the orange hair. They just put a tuxedo on him. I think that more or less we were going to get it, but they said, why would we do this? This is more costive. And again, they're the same book practically. You can't tell me 1 and 2 are not practically the same book minus the twist.
In the second book, it's kind of left ambiguous to what the dummy in the second book's name.
Dude, Slappy gets tackled, his head cracks, and a giant white worm crawls out of his head. Not missed this time. So, but that's the second book, and we're not talking about that right now.
Yeah.
Regardless, though, they were going to make it, and they didn't. This is one of the scrapped episodes along with The Abominable Snowman of Pasadena, but we'll save that for that episode. So, let's get into rating the book, and then we'll talk a bit about how Slappy kind of dominated the entire series and became its mascot at the reboot. So, starting with Evan, what would you rate this book 1 out of 10?
Maybe a 7 or a high 6, because it is iconic, but at the same time, there are those growing pains from Goosebumps just not being what it would eventually become.
Okay.
So,
Grinch, what would you rate this, 1 through 10?
If I'm being completely honest, 100 out of 100.
So,
honest.
I'm going to give it a 10 then.
Because it's one of my favorite books, and it's one of my favorite villains of the Goosebumps series, and I feel like, unlike the Monster Blood, where it had more books, I feel like Slappy had enough books to where people are like, oh yeah, I remember Slappy, he was one of my favorite villains,
Josh, what would you rate this out of 1 through 10?
I would give it a 8.5. Personally, it's one of my favorite books. Thinking of my boy Slappy and his journey to being, the most evilest dummy there is.
You would be the motherfucker who dropped some decimals on me. Brandon, what would you rate this book?
I'll give it a 8. An 8 only because I agree it has got a lot of growing pains. Also, it is definitely, in my opinion, besides maybe the next book, the last book that felt real, edgy compared to the rest of the series.
well, if I can just add something too, because part of what I like about Goosebumps is that the whole series feels really, at least the original, feel really uniform. So this stands out on its own. It's a really good story by itself. But yeah, for all the other reasons I mentioned about the growing pains. Just to add that.
Okay, so Waffle says 6 out of 10. The twist was kind of a letdown. That's a fair rating. I myself, I'm going to say, I guess I'm going to go with the book's number. I'm going to rate this as a 7.
It's the start of Icon and his rise to fame. Obviously, there's always going to be a bumpy road for everything.
Wait, would you say there's bumps in the night on that road?
Yes, there is.
Yeah. Oh, there it is! Okay, so after averaging our score, this book scores a 7.75, and I think that sits right about correct for what this book was. There you go. Thank you, Waffle. So, going with Evan, why don't you go with your closing statements for this book?
I guess it's more of a question. Why do you all think Slappy, out of all the other mascots in Goosebumps, is the one that really just took off and really defines the series in a lot of ways?
Okay, let's start with Grinch.
I feel like outside of Love to write him the most, because he said in the interview during the movie's release that he loves making his wisecracks and mean humor became Stein's favorite.
Josh?
The reason why Slappy rose to stardom over their monsters, he just was that guy. He's the one you're like, you're gonna notice me. I'm gonna be the top, and you're gonna notice me.
He's him!
I have to be mean, crude. I'm gonna be that way. He's like a diva.
He's LeBron James.
Jesus Christ.
LeBron. But no. Overall, great book.
Brandon, what do you think about Evan's question?
So I would say it's probably because his wittiness, I've always kind of liked that about Slappy, and also just because, I guess to me, the reason I remember a lot of my friends knew and liked Slappy is because it was something simple, and, you know, slime with monster blood, that's not really a person. The camera, you can't really do anything with that. Like, Slappy is really, really interesting compared to the rest of the series.
Alright, so Waffle, what do you think? Easiest to introduce, mean attitude, and is a leader and an alpha male. Okay, those are all valid points. So let me answer Evan's question here. Personally, I think he's the most relatable. He's the size of a child. He's like the Chucky of the kids series, and at the end of the day, because he says things that are kind of harsh, it's like you guys said, he's just, you love to hate him. That's all it is.
Okay.
So I think that about wraps up this episode. Does anybody have any closing statements before we sign off for the evening?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Remember to stay cool. Remember, he walks and he stalks.
Well, I just think it's funny you mentioned Chucky, because to me, that's why Slappy was so scary to me as a kid, was because I had seen parts of Child's Play, the Chucky movie, and so I was already scared of small animate dolls.
It's a good book. I forgot how edgy it was, and also, puke.
Light work, no reaction. Waffle, it was this fancy, he could have had the dummies argue, mimicking the twins' rivalry to create a conflict. Now that would have been interesting, and it's disappointing we didn't have that happen. Especially because they were brothers. Like, you hit the nail on the head there, Waffle.
That would have been a good story. Have Slappy and Mr. Wood, and then have the sisters.
Yeah, them taking sides, and the sisters then see that the dummies are arguing, like, wow, that's just like us. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Goosebumps Podcast Can Be Murder. Next week, we're going to review Give Yourself Goosebumps #1, Escape from the Carnival of Horrors.
Readers beware, you're in for a scare.
Well, thanks for watching. We'll stab you in the next one.